work, explore this thing we call faith. All right, any questions before we get started? Great. So we're going to start in a few minutes with a short video as the set induction of our conversation. And I wanted to introduce this video. So there's a person, an artist, his name is Hanan Harchol, and he's a New York-based teacher, filmmaker, animator, artist, and classical guitarist. And he was born in Kibbutz Kinneret in Israel, and he moved to the United States at the age of 2 with his family, and he lives in Manhattan with his spouse and with their children. And one of the projects that Hanan Harchol started engaging in a few years ago was something called Jewish Food for Thought. So what we're going to see is that these are animations. So he himself has animated them, and he's written them all, and he voices everyone, including himself. And as you'll see, the other person he's chatting with in this video is his father. And these Jewish Food for Thought videos were funded by the Covenant Foundation. There are 13 of them in total. And what they do is they teach Jewish concept, Jewish ethics through, I think, thought-provoking animated conversations with Hanan himself and his parents. And as you'll see at the end, just so that it doesn't kind of come at you, the father, whose name is Micha Harchol, he appears in, I think, every single video of the animated series. And the video was, this video that we're going to watch was released in 2013, and Hanan's father died in 2012. So there's kind of a bittersweet nature to this video where you'll see at the end, it's in memory of his beloved father. Now, for those of you who were able to tune in this morning, not so long ago, to the morning service, Holy Blossom, it was a beautiful service. Rabbi Splansky's sermon happened to coincide with what we're going to be exploring right now, which is faith. So just keep that on the brain. We're not talking about exactly the same thing, but I thought it was really nice that if you caught the sermon, we're sort of, you know, an hour and a bit later, still on this theme, if it's sort of been floating around in your head. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully the sound will work out and everything will be great. And the video is about 5 minutes or just shy.
It's a question of faith. Don't start talking about God. I'm not talking about God, Hanan. I'm talking about faith. Isn't it the same thing? No. Faith is fundamentally human. Here, for example, I reached out to shake your hand, and I had faith that you would shake it back. What if I hadn't? But you did. But what if I hadn't? Then you wouldn't have. It doesn't change the fact that in the moment, I had faith. Doesn't the outcome matter? Not when it comes to faith. The outcome is the future. Faith is a present. You're not making any sense. I never said faith is about making sense. Faith is about trust. Faith is our ability to trust life. I trust logic and reason, science. Believing in science is also faith. You're trusting that things will work according to scientific calculations. And they do, most of the time, except for when they don't. For example, you believe that doctors will be able to help you when you're sick. And they do. Most of the time, except for when they don't. That's life. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have faith. So are you saying there's nothing we can do? We're supposed to just sit back and let whatever happens, happen? No, I never said faith was passive. On the contrary, faith is active. That's the point. Faith is experienced through life. It's about delving into the experience of life. But how are we supposed to have any control? Who's talking about having control? We're talking about having faith, which we get by believing in God. Just because you believe in God, Hanan, doesn't mean you have faith. And if you don't believe in God, it doesn't mean that you don't have faith. So where does faith come from? Faith is experienced through life. Faith is our ability to trust life. But what if things don't work out the way I want in life? How am I supposed to have faith then? Faith is about letting life educate us instead of trying to solve life in terms of what we expect life should be. So you're saying just let go. No, I told you. Faith is about being active, not passive. Well, if life is whatever it's going to be, regardless of what we expect or want it to be, then what can we possibly do? Just be. Experience it. Experience a moment. And at the same time, take the next step. But I don't want to repeat the same mistakes I've made in the past. Faith isn't about the past. It's about the present. Faith is always now. But then how are we supposed to know what to do? By listening to what's inside of us, connecting to the present moment and letting the experience educate us. Trust life, Hanan, and take the next step. But what if the next time I make the wrong decision? What if is a future? But faith is always now. The next time is the first time. That's completely overwhelming. The unstable situations are an invitation to believe. Delve in deeper. Embrace life, especially when it's not going the way you expect or want. Life is just too uncertain for me to simply trust in it. Hanan, some of the choices you make are going to turn out to be right, and some are going to be wrong. That's precisely the problem. But that's not what faith is about. Faith is about the way in which we make our choices. When we make a choice with faith, it's an internal choice, a creative choice. We are actually creating the present moment without fear of the future or regrets about the past. Creating? Yes. Faith is a bridge between the past and the future. Faith is our ability to trust life while taking the next step. To trust that the person will return our handshake. I don't know, it sounds too simple, almost childish. It's easier for us to connect to faith when we're children. When you were a little boy, Hanan, you always believed that I would come home, even on the evenings that I didn't. And the next day, you believed again that on that evening I would come home, even if I didn't. But eventually you did. You always did. You know, Hanan, someday I'm not going to be here anymore. I won't come home anymore. Wow, Daddy, it feels like we've been riding forever. When are we getting there? Don't you see, Hanan? We're already here.
All right. Just get a show of hands if anyone had seen any of these videos before by Hanan Harful. A few people. Has anyone ever seen this one before? Maybe in a yes. Great. So I've taught on many of powerful as videos in the past. And while I had seen this one, I hadn't brought it to a group setting, and I thought it was very powerful. Yeah. So the reason why I let the credits continue to the end, where the filmmaker offers the thanks to all the teachers, the wise ones who have helped him, is you might have noticed some names like Rabbi Nachman, who has long been deceased. And so he's putting everyone sort of, time is falling unto itself when he's offering thanks. And that is because everything that Hanan is putting into these films is not just the whim of a New Yorker or an Israeli. They're deeply steeped in Jewish texts. So we're going to meet some of these wise teachers who came before him and who have come before us, and who have something to say about faith. And that's how we created the video. So I want to start with this idea that sometimes we hear that having faith means believing in something when you don't have any proof, right? And at least in my life, God is a great example of that, right? People who want to challenge me sometimes say, well, what's the proof that God exists, right? And I want to counter that back, right? And I ask, do we have to have proof that God exists in order to believe in something? Call it God, call it force, call it the divine. Has that been the case in history? Did the Israelite people, did the Hebrew nation, did the Jews always need faith? I always need proof in order to have faith that God existed or was in our lives or somehow had a powerful force. Is that the case today? Do we feel like we can't have faith in something or believe in something if we don't have proof? And a larger, broader question is, why might we feel that we need to have proof before we can believe or have faith, right? It could be the opposite, right? We could think, well, if I have faith in this thing, doesn't matter what we're talking about, then maybe the proof comes to reveal itself because you're so primed for it. I'll speak personally that although the whole conversation today is not just about God, that when people have said to me, how do you know that there's a God? Or, maybe the proof where it comes out. What's the proof that there's a God? Or why do you believe in God? Where's that evidence? In my life, and for so many people, it happens in nature, right? Or it could happen in the moments between human beings. I'll say, as someone who gave birth to a child almost 9 years ago, there was nothing that could have swayed my mind from those hours, those moments of physically birthing something that did not have some kind of divinity to it. I felt cosmically connected through time and space, through every mammal that had ever existed, that ever birthed, would ever become a parent. It was a really, really powerful experience for me. Okay, so Hanan's father is talking in this video, is talking to Hanan, and he's saying that faith isn't really about proof at all. He says it's about trusting in life and taking active steps. So the father says, and this is a quote, "I never said that faith is about making sense. Faith is about trust. Faith is our ability to trust life." Now, can anyone, maybe you want to unmute yourself, what was the thing that the father did in the beginning? It was kind of like a small thing. What did he do at the beginning of the video that was an effort to trust that something was going to happen? He trusted the next step that his son was going to take.
He reached out to take his hand.
Yes, beautiful, right? He said, I had faith that I was going to reach my hand out and you were going to meet it. Now, of course, the son says, but what if I hadn't? But you did. But what if I hadn't? Well, then you wouldn't have, right? But the father's saying, I still trusted in life that the next step, I took step A, and the next step was that you were going to extend your hand out to me. So this idea is very Jewish. And a great example comes from Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, otherwise known as Rav Kook. And he lived from 1865 to 1935 in Latvia. And for those of you who may know, he was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, or what was Israel before Israel was a 1948 country. So here's what he writes about the ability to trust life. A person must trust in their life, must believe in their physical, materialistic abilities and their moral, ethical strengths together. When a person believes in their spiritual life, they find satisfaction with the labors of their soul, and they continually grow and ascend. So the first question that we have to grapple with right now is, what does it mean when Hanan's father and Rav Kook are asking us to trust life? Can you think of times in your life when this has been easy for you? And can you think of times in your life when perhaps that has been more challenging, to just trust? The proverbial hand was put out and you believed, you had faith that the next thing, the next step would happen. Anyone have any ideas? It's okay if you don't want to share, this could be deeply personal, but if you had any, when has that been something that you have done and it felt easy to trust life? Maybe there was a time that felt challenging.
You know, I think when you look at what's going on in the world, and going back to what the rabbi said in her sermon, we've lost faith in one another to a great extent. And when I remember, you know, when I was growing up, you would always believe that the people, I'm an American, you'd believe the people around the country were all people of good faith. You didn't always agree with them, but I never had a visceral dislike or revulsion to a president of the United States. And I couldn't have imagined it until now. We don't have faith. And when you do the vidui, the corollary to the vidui is that we all recognize that when we have those behaviors, we failed in some way. And we all share that. And those are the principles of behavior that drive values and morality. And I guess you could call those articles of faith. I never really thought of them as faith, but I guess they are. But when you look at what's happening in the world right now, we don't give each other the benefit of the doubt. You can have sin with no chance of redemption. You can be defined. People are defining one another in their own contexts without any offer of redemption or change, growth. And I find it hard to have faith right now. When I look at what's going on back home and I talk to my family, I struggle because people have lost the belief in the basic goodness of one another. And if we can't believe that people we disagree with are fundamentally good people with different opinions, but are flawed in some horrific way, are either they were born flawed, they had privilege that they imposed, or they had some ugliness that was intrinsic to who they are, or where they were born, or how they came into the world, or how much money their family had. You don't have any basis for compromise. You have no basis for discussion. And so I would say right now I have a lot of trouble having faith in that process. And even the people who I agree with aren't listening to the people they disagree with, and people don't even want to hear from the people they disagree with. What that says is, I don't believe that if I put out my hand, you'll take it. And that's that could be considered the most fundamental breakdown of faith I've ever seen in my life. And I'm certainly struggling with it right now. And then you want to say, where is God? Now's a good time, right? Anyway, I'll leave those thoughts on the table and remute.
Thank you. Those are really, really good thoughts. Yes. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have anything to add or take in a different direction of when you've trusted life easily or you've trusted and it hasn't worked out, or trusting life just has been a challenge. Judy?
First, Stuart, those were amazing comments, and thank you. I'm finding the pandemic is really testing my faith, because right now, the simple thing, a cloth mask or a fabric, covering your nose and mouth, makes a difference to life. And I find the Orthodox Jewish community is so resistant. And to me, Judaism, the number one commandment is to preserve life. And here's a simple thing we can do to preserve life: to do what the doctors say, to keep our distance, to wear a mask. And yet, it seems that we're asking something too much, and specifically too much of our Jewish community. And so how can we say that we are so strong in our belief and, we are so right, and at the same time, we won't do the simplest thing to preserve each other? I know this would tie into Hillel's 3 questions: if I'm only for me, who am I? But I mean, to me, it's all interconnected.
Thank you, Judy. Hanan in the video asks his father if trusting life is supposed to be just simply letting whatever happens, happens. Right? He's trying to understand what his father means about trusting life. Oh, so I should just be passive and just let life happen to me. And the father gets pretty adamant and passionate in that moment. He says, no, I never said that faith was passive. On the contrary, faith is active. That's the point. Faith is experienced through life. It's about delving into the experience of life. Faith is our ability to trust life while taking the next step. Very powerful teaching. Faith is our ability to trust life while taking the next step. So taking the next step, right, is an active verb, right? It's not passive in any way, and requires action in our own lives. And we know that Judaism, A, is not a passive religion. B is actually quite active, right? Our job is to engage in and with this world. We engage in mitzvot, in our sacred obligations, and we're concerned with how we make our way through this life. Right? I don't think that Judaism has any teachings that I could think of that are about just letting life happen to us and becoming a passive participant in life. So here's another question. Do you find it more exciting or more frightening to take the next steps in life when you have no idea what the outcome will be? Do you find it more exciting or frightening to take the next steps when you have no idea what's going to happen? How often do you do so, if ever? And how does taking these steps feel like faith to you? Ariel, you had your hand up?
So I can actually reflect that on an active level, I have found it to be terrifying. And then I've been able to observe that the subconscious emotion is excitement. I think I'll answer your first question with this, and is that I realized in listening to this, I don't know that I knew it was faith, but I've been actively engaging in letting life happen and taking the next step for about the past year, starting with deciding to quit my job and move back to Toronto. And I did that without knowing what was going to come next, and decided that it was more important for me to make that life change than to know what was going to happen next. And in that decision process, I was really, really frightened the whole time. I was like, I think I know, I think all of logic is telling me that this is the right decision to make right now, but I don't know that this could be a really stupid thing I'm about to do. And the second it happened, I remember I quit my job. I was driving home that day and I just felt like the world's in front of me and I'm so excited about it. And so there's that.
Nice. So I'm hearing that there was, fear, trepidation, but not once you were in it or once you had made the decision or when you're looking back on it, the feeling changed a bit.
100%.
One of excitement. Yeah, that's great. And now looking back, has it been a good move?
Oh, it's been a terrific move.
Good.
I've been having to do a lot of just like not 5-year planning, but like one step at a time. And I'm sitting here about like just over 18 months past that decision point. And I've got joy in all of the work I do. And I've managed to like carve out a very different path than I think I knew I would have done. And good things just keep coming. So faith and life are playing nicely for me. And I just express a lot of gratitude for that, recognizing that this pandemic especially has caused the opposite for a lot of people. So I don't take it for granted that things are working well in my space, but there's a lot of faith, I think.
I have a teacher who talks about tattoo-worthy quotes. Whether we're going to get a tattoo or not is not the question. But Ariel, this might be your tattoo-worthy quote. Faith is our ability to trust life while taking the next step. Good. Anyone else want to reflect on that quote and whether you think it's for you more exciting or more frightening to take steps when you don't know what's going to happen or what's on the other side? David?
Oh, but over the last little while, I've been dealing with the idea that at any given moment, we can move forward or we can go growth or safety. And it's much easier to go to that which is safe. But I think this whole trust in God and moving towards the light and having faith that we're supposed to be moving forward and progressing. And we can always have uncertainty. We want certainty, but on the other hand, we have to understand that there's a certain uncertainty that exists in life. And what I realize is that as much as people, I look at a lot of life, and when it comes to having faith in God, it's a matter of realizing that life is not criminal law, it's civil law. It's not based on the laws of probability, what's going to happen. And then you have to, and based on laws of probability, there comes a certain point that you make a decision. And then based on that decision, it takes you on a certain course of action. And then the great thing that happens after that is that you're able to test your hypothesis all over again. So for example, you can say, I believe that there is a God. Okay, let's test it. Okay, now let me start the argument all over again. And then supposedly after you've gone through enough experiences, you sit and say, fine, have no fear, move forward, move forward, move forward, have a faithfulness in what is being, a trust in what is being taught here, or what has been taught. And just one final comment, I was listening to Harold Kushner's book, he's talking about no fear. And he says supposedly that's one of the most common refrains in the Bible of have no fear. And so that's the whole thing about having trust and moving forward, but knowing that, we have brains in our heads to be able to make decisions about what our actions are based on that fear.
So another big question that you can, if you're writing or if you're just thinking about for the rest of the afternoon, what you want to think about. The question is, when have you waited for something to happen? And when have you trusted life and taken the next step? Right? Those could be opposites. When have you just thought, I'm just gonna wait? Ariel could have thought like, I'll just stay and see what the next possibility is. Or I could move back to Toronto, but not hustle. Or I don't know what you've done, but, not taking the steps, but just sort of see like what comes my way. And then on the other side of that coin, when have you not waited and when have you just taken the first steps? There's an actual tattoo that my friend has, that it says, leap and the net will appear. And I feel like that kind of fits into this milieu about taking the next first step. And so the question for you is, which one seems more comfortable, right? Waiting for the thing to happen, and you'll respond to it, right? Again, we're not passive as human beings, but the things will happen to you. Or are you the kind of person that thinks, no, I'm not waiting. I am here, I am now, and I am making the moment. So that takes us to the second large theme that I've pulled out of this video. The first one that we just had a little bit of discussion is the ability to trust life. This one is about that Hanan and his father are talking about how faith is right now, and it's about connecting to and creating the present moment. So here we have part of the conversation with the two men on the subway. The father says, faith is not about the past, it's about the present. Faith is always now. Hanan says, but then how are we supposed to know what to do? The father says, by listening to what's inside of us, connecting to the present moment, and letting the experience educate us. Trust life, Hanan, and take the next step. But what if the next time I make the wrong decision? Hanan asks. What if is the future, his father said. But faith is always now. The next time is the first time. I absolutely love how that interchange ends. The next time is the first time. So what's happening here is that Hanan really needs his father to explain to him that faith is not what's happening in what happened in the past or what might happen in the future, but it's about connecting to the present moment. And there's a beautiful teaching from the Talmud that elucidates this. It's from Sanhedrin 98a, in case you ever wanted to look it up. Here's what it says. The ultimate spiritual experience can only come through connection to the present moment. So just to set up what's happening, we have Rabbi Joshua ben Levi gets instructions from Eliyahu, the prophet, to meet the Messiah who's residing at the gates of Rome. Okay, so Eliyahu is saying to Rabbi Joshua, you need to go to the gates of Rome. The Messiah is stationed there. So back into Talmud. So Rabbi Joshua went to him and he said, when will you come? He's asking the Messiah, when will you come, Master? Today, the Messiah answered. On this, Rabbi Joshua returns to Eliyahu, and Eliyahu inquired, what did he say to you? And Rabbi Joshua answered. Eliyahu observed, the Messiah thereby assured you and your father a portion of the world to come. He spoke falsely to me, Rabbi Joshua said, stating he would come today, but he has not. Eliyahu answered him, this is what the Messiah said to you today, if you will hear God's voice. And that quote, today, if you will hear God's voice, as so often happens in the Talmud, comes from the book of Psalms, chapter 95, verse 7. So I love that. So we have this rabbi who goes to the gates and he's asking the Mashiach, when will you come? Mashiach says, today. Guy goes back and says to Eliyahu, I don't see him anywhere. And Eliyahu's teaching is, he will come today, but only if you hear God's voice. So I think that's a lovely teaching about staying focused in the present. We may think that religions are teaching about what happens in the future, a lot of where I go when I die, based on what I did in my life or what happens after I die. But, you know, if you think about it, there are many, many different thoughts throughout Jewish history about what happens when we die, but there isn't one doctrine or dogma, right? You yourself may think there's heaven, Or you may think that's Narishkeit, I don't believe any of it. Judaism, in the main, really doesn't have a dogma about what happens when we die. Our religion is very concerned about what we do in the present moment. Today, our tradition says, is the most important. Don't worry so much about the future, connect with the present. So Nachman of Breslov, who lived in 1772 to 1810 in Ukraine, he had a book in 1808 published, which is a collection of his writings, and it's called Likutei Moharan. And he's explaining that Psalm verse that we saw in that the Talmud quoted, where it said, "Today, if you will hear God's voice." So Rabbi Nachman says, on the verse "today, if you hear God's voice," this is a fundamental principle in the service of God. One should not consider but that single day. Just like in the pursuit of a livelihood and one's needs, one must not focus on one day to the next. So too, in the service of God, one must focus only on that day and that moment. Since in this world, a person has only the very day and the very moment in which they find themselves, tomorrow is a completely different world. So let me ask everyone, why do we think that Judaism places such importance on the present moment? Any thoughts about that?
Fundamental to our faith is our morality. I mean, we declared morality of God, or demanded morality of God, even in the Torah, where Moses argues with God. And what that tells us is that there's an absolute, and we're a part of the process of determining that, to the extent that Moses can actually implore God. Abraham can implore God, and that's different than other faiths. But morality is always what you do right now. Yom Kippur is here for when we slipped up. And right now we can make repentance for what we did yesterday, right now. But the only thing about Yom Kippur isn't how you felt about it then. This is where I am today, and this is how I feel about what happened then. And so we're always, not only are we very much always in the present, but we're always being asked to judge what we do on the basis of moral principles. And it really is the core of being Jewish. So you can't really separate our morality from our actions. And the only time you can impact actions is as you make them. You can only impact them right now. Reviewing your past actions is something you do right now too, but again, it's always what we do at this instant that we're looking at as Jews.
Nice. So I like that. You're bringing up that there are a couple things happening in our tradition. We certainly have Yom Kippur, which is a very broad look of the past year, and the Amidah Esrei, the central part of every prayer service, when it's not a holiday or Shabbat, has all these asking prayers that are added in. And one of the things that we're asking for is forgiveness. There's actually every moment of every day, or for some people 3 times a day, this opportunity to seek forgiveness. And just to put a pin on it, I'm thinking about, the dogs in our midst. I have a pet dog, cherished family member. And, the 101 of training dogs is if they do something in the house that you didn't want them to do, let's say, it doesn't work to tell them about it 4 hours later, right? Like they're like goldfish. Like they're just not going to remember what they did when they do it. That's just not how their brains work. So what I'm hearing from that is the opportunity that we have at really right when it happens, or as soon as we come to realize that maybe we've taken a misstep, to seek rectification, and that it is a moment to moment and a day by day basis. Wonderful. Anyone else have any comments about why we think Judaism places such importance on the present moment? And I'll ask a second question in case you'd rather answer this one. Do you agree that faith is about being in the present moment? Do you think that faith is about being in the present moment? And it's okay if you don't want to answer publicly. These are, you know, some of your own Yom Kippur reflective moments. You can be writing or just thinking.
Well, there's the whole idea of Hineni.
I wonder if I could perhaps ask you, Ambassador Ray, about some other notable.
Oops.
Go on.
No, shouldn't have been there. No, but there's this whole concept of Judaism of Hineni. And it was funny because what I really took away from Rabbi Splansky's sermon of the second day of Rosh Hashanah was this notion of presence and being present in the past and being present in the present and being present in the future. And it's funny because one of the things I do every day is I do a priming exercise by Tony Robbins. And one of the things that it's this three-stage primer in which part of it is having great gratitude for what's happened in the past, having gratitude for the presence of the energy of the presence, and now having gratitude for how we're going to be feeling in the future when we've succeeded at something that we planned for. But the whole idea is really to focus on what's going on right in front of us. And the way you get into what's going on right in front of you is actually to project backwards. Like even when in the Passover Seder, when they say we're supposed to imagine that we were there coming out of Egypt, and we're supposed to imagine what it was like if each of us as an individual was actually there. So it's this whole idea of presence, and again, I've been told Hineni is used like 23 times in the Torah. So obviously, it's like you look at you sort of say, hey, this is a theme that's rather important to the religion.
Yeah, absolutely. Hineni, what a great example that you've brought in. You know, in Torah, when God asks someone or calls them by name, you know, you could say, like in old Hebrew school classes, Ani po, I am here, or you could just say yes, you know, if someone calls your name. But, you know, Abraham and Moses and others, their answer when God calls to them is Hineni. And that's a statement of presence, you know, I am here, here I am. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So a question that we're not, you know, I'm not going to seek answers to, and one that you could just be thinking on this beautiful day is, if we agree, and if you subscribe to this teaching, or you just really, you know, it's kind of getting into you and you're thinking about it, about faith is now and connecting to the present moment. The questions are, when do you find yourself losing the ability to stay rooted to the present? And what kinds of things pull you away from being here right now? What happens in your life that takes away your ability to stay rooted in the present? And what kinds of things tend to or might pull you away from being in the now?
Well, fear of the future.
So, yes, Jane?
Well, do you want an answer? I'm just thinking it's
Sure.
fear of the future, because the future is uncertain. So when you dwell on the uncertainties, it makes your fear increase. So I guess the only way to mitigate that is to focus on the present and what you can do now to diminish your anxiety. That's the only.
Yes, beautiful. And to go back to the first thing that we talked about before, about just faith is just taking the next first step, right? So rather than belaboring and worrying about a future that we don't know how it will unfold, maybe we just stay in the present and just take that next first step, which could be a decision that is made or a response. Louis or Louis, your hand is up. You're muted.
Hi, sorry. That's my husband. I'm Ilyse.
Hi, Ilyse.
Hi. Just something that gets in the way is the past, right? Like I think for a lot of Jews, it's hard to think of having faith when you look at our recent past. So that's something that's personally comes up, and I know comes up a lot as a people.
Beautiful. Thank you. So the dad, Hanan's dad, he also in the video, he talks about that when we connect to the present moment through faith, what it allows us to do is become participants in creation itself. He says, when we make a choice of faith, it is an internal choice, a creative choice. We are actually creating the present moment without fear of the future or regrets of the past. That is powerful. If you can see my notes, I just wrote, wow. That really hit me, like right deep in the kishkas. When we make a choice of faith, it's a creative choice. We are creating the present moment, and we're not worried about the future, and we're not having regrets about the past. Jane, this is very analogous to what you were saying before. So back to another Rabbi Nachman quote in a collection of teachings called Sichot Haram, which literally just means discussions with rabbi or conversations. He illustrates how obsessing over a mistake in the past can prevent a person from creating a new life in the present. Here's what he writes. The wicked are filled with regrets. He's quoting a Talmudic teaching. He says, our obsession with our past errors prevents us from being free and open to the changes in our ability and to correct in the present. The mistake focuses us on who we once were. As such, it exists in our lives as a substitute for responsibility and a rejection of renewal and freedom. So here are some questions as we think about that quote. How often do past successes or failures affect your present choices? And how often do your present choices change depending on what you might think happens in the future? And in your life, are there benefits? And if so, what are they? Of focusing on the past or the future, and not always being centered in the present. This teaching kind of goes against a lot of the thinking that I've had for many, many years. The idea that if we belabor the past, that it somehow keeps us from being present in the current moment, from creating the present moment. But as Ilyse said, there's something very Jewish about focusing on the past, right? We are taught again and again in Torah to remember to forget, which is kind of a funny thing, right? We have to remember Amalek's name, and Amalek can be the stand-in for all terribleness that has gone on, including Hitler, right? We have to remember, we can't forget about the things that have happened to our people and the people who have been the leaders in those movements, because if we don't, it could happen again. So we have to remember not to forget. So I want to hear if anyone has any thoughts about this Nachman teaching and the video teaching about the idea that it's really about staying focused in the present moment, and some of the questions that I put out before. Do you stay focused on successes or failures of the past? Do you sort of live there in your mind, and do those successes and failures of the past influence or affect choices that you're going to make right now in the present?
When you, there's a difference between learning from experiences and learning from your life, or remembering things that have happened, or anticipating the future and making plans and how you behave, right? So I mean, if you talked about articles of faith in terms of behavior, in terms of morality and integrity, that's a different thing from saying, I put my hand on a stove and my hand got burned, I'm not going to do that again. That's learning, and that's human, and that's we're always learning throughout our lives, right? So I don't think anyone would say to look back at something that happened before and try to avoid it if it had a bad outcome is focusing on the past, but to be hopeful about going through life with a spirit of joy and hopefulness. Now that's faith. The belief that something good can always happen, and that no matter what it is, it's always better than it could be. And a spirit of thankfulness and gratitude, I think, is faith. And I think when you read, you can read memoirs of people who came through the Holocaust, and every day you can see the strength of their faith. They weren't stupid. They were fully aware of their situation. They knew that it wasn't good. They knew of the sense of loss, but they still, every day, they had some absolute sense of faith that the universe is ultimately good, God is real, and this is how we behave as human beings. And they didn't go off and they didn't treat their fellow inmates badly. We don't treat each other badly. We don't say, okay, something bad happened to me, now I'm going to do something bad to you. So I think there's a difference. And so I don't think thinking about the past means you're not in the present. You're thinking about the past and the present. But what I think, I think if you've decided that you're never going to put your hand out again, to use the analogy that was in the video, then you've lost faith. So I think, the father didn't come home today. Well, tomorrow's another day. And I think you have to separate those things. That's all. I think we do both, and we're supposed to do both. We're not supposed to forget our past. That's why we go through our entire Torah and our stories. We never forget anything. And we still have faith that tomorrow's a good day and that God's still there. And I think you have both.
Many years ago, I was at listening to a lecture by Elliot Malamud, and he quoted Woody Allen, who said the only thing he had faith in was the power of distraction.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, it's really sad because, especially with the world we're living in with the smartphones, I have teenage kids, and to get these kids to focus on anything is nearly impossible. And it's this whole, it's now that the more I think about it, this whole concept of Hineni is basically the concept of focus. Focus, 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 focus. And as much as learning stuff, it's learning the skills of focus are going to be the most important skills we can teach these kids.
Right, because Hineni and being in the present moment, everyone, is not the teaching of this video is giving us this idea of like the present happening to us. But there is another way to look at it, which, you might find yourself like this sometimes, or know someone like this, where they're just sort of swimming in the sea of the present moment at all times. They're just sort of like, I don't quite know how to explain it, because I don't find myself personally in that world of just sort of like, there's a haziness of not really feeling like they're present, like there isn't a Hineni-ness to them, or a rootedness. And maybe that means life is happening to them, or maybe they're just happy to sort of like float. But there is that sense that, or at least my observation is that there's, when I've had conversations with people like that, is their heads tend to be either forward looking or, in a reflective mood rather than present. Good. So I'm aware of the time, and I want us to make sure that we, have whatever else we need to do before we log on for the afternoon. Maybe take a walk or a bio break or whatever we need to do. So I just want to, I want to conclude with just asking a few more questions that we're not going to share. These are really just to-go questions. Imagine a little to-go bag that you have. The question is, how much of what happens in your life do you think happens to you? And how much that's happening in your life are you an active creator of? So think about the life you currently live, even think in the past. What is, if you could ratio it or percentage it, how much happens to you? And how much are you in control of? In control, I mean in the best possible sense of that word. How much are you actually creating? And we haven't talked much this afternoon about God, but if I may bring God in, how does your personal concept of God fit into this balance of things happening to you in a passive way, or you're actively creating the present moment? And how does all of this, we're going to put this all in like a big question bow for the afternoon. How does all of this relate to faith? Faith in the largest sense of faith, of you stick your hand out, someone's going to, reciprocate. Or we could be talking about faith in God, faith in human beings, faith that we will come out of this pandemic, as Rabbi Splansky said in her sermon this morning, we will be birthed to something new, and it may be a shorter time than evolution, but who knows what is going to happen. And sort of cycling it all back to this discussion that we're having through this video, how much of what is ultimately going to unfold as we continue to move through and not skirt around this pandemic, how much of it are you actively participating in? Right? Are you just seeing what happens to you and to humanity, or are you, going through the muck, whatever that means to you, to create the new or the next normal that we've all been told we're in and is upon us? So I hope this has been helpful and has been fodder to think about as we continue on our way on Yom Kippur.
Thank you, Rabbi Glickman. I think we all have a lot to think about for the afternoon.
Me too.
And how relevant everything is to this time right now. Yeah. I'm now going to make the plug that afternoon services are starting up again at 3:30, just as a reminder, and then they're followed by Yiskor and Ela. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. That was great.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Good day, everybody.
See everyone soon.